Hey guys, I'm joined here tonight with Jack Donovan. Jack, it's nice having you on.
Nice to be on.
I notice whenever you get interviewed, people always wanna talk about the homosexuality issue. But I know you said you're kinda tired of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a book I wrote. I think it came out in 2007.
Yeah, it's been
So
discussed enough.
yeah, it's boring.
So you've written recently for countercurrents.com. Let's see, you also write for Alternative Right and the Spearhead, which is a men's rights forum.
Yep.
I guess so. Your recent article on from Countercurrents, it's called "Hate Globally, Like Locally."
Yeah, it's my Happy New Year's message. I was just thinking about all the kind of negative. This year I've had a job where I'm kind of out in the community a lot, and I deal with a lot of different people who I genuinely like. And sooner or later, those people are going to find their way to my website and look at my work and whatever. And I started to think about, well, what do I want to have there, and what do I want to show people? And do I want to be just this guy who is angry about everything and doesn't have anything nice to say about the where he lives and the people around him, or could I catch a few whatever flies with honey or whatever the expression is? Would it be better to have some people say, oh well, this guy has a lot of extreme views, but well, he's actually kind of he supports some people in the area. He does some things. I mean, that's a better way to interact with people, I think.
Yeah, well, you see that globalism turns everything into a meaningless, trashy, and stupid. And it's kind
Yes.
of interesting because people use the globalists are the ones that use the word diversity, but if anything, it sort of globalism makes everything homogenous.
Oh, absolutely. It makes everything. I mean, it's globalism that gave us, big box stores and, you can go places all over the world. It almost made travel pointless, to a certain extent. It's like, why do I want to go to another place where I can see the same stores and the same malls and everything? It takes the kind of uniqueness of a community away.
And you see that any challenge to globalism has to occur. The antidote to it is localism, and you would say localism even more so than nationalism.
Well, yeah, I mean, I tend to think of humans as tribal animals, and so men kind of naturally pack up in smaller groups than I think even nations. When you get it to the size of a nation, you actually need a lot of laws to keep men in place. Men kind of naturally pack up in much smaller groups than that. I mean, I've also written about Dunbar's number, which they say that humans have a hard time making meaningful connections with more than 150 people. And, Facebook friends, the people that you really communicate even with on Facebook, tends to top out around that number. And I think even smaller groups are what we actually, lump into naturally. But nationalism is really just tribalism, only larger, But, there is a rubber band where it gets too big. And I think Europe is going through that right now. It's like you can only expand so far and absorb everything, and then it becomes a big nothing. And then people want to snap back to a smaller size.
So you talk about, you live in Portland, Oregon, and you talk about kind of the stereotypical kind of, they're called swipples, stuff white people like types.
Right.
And you've trolled the local Slut Walk and Occupy Wall Street protesters. What was your take on those two events?
Well, the Slut Walk, I mean, that was a national phenomenon. I mean, international phenomenon. But the Occupy, I think there's probably a lot of overlap in the people that participate in Occupy, and a lot of the women who participated in Occupy probably also participated in the Slut Walk. There's a lot of people who just protest. There's a protest community that's on the left that kind of gets involved in these things all the time. And, you can really see that in San Francisco. There's a lot more of that even. There's just you've
lived in San Francisco as well.
Yeah. So, there's just a lot of people who protest all the time. That it's kind of a social thing, I think, for a lot of people on the left, especially.
Yeah, so you talk about Portland, and you sort of, how do you tie in, you talk about acting about this localness, kind of preserving the local culture. How do you tie that in with your experience living in Portland?
Well, I mean, what I think I'm going to try and do over the next year is just highlight, things that I think, there's this great company here, for instance, it's called McMenamins, and it started out kind of as a hippie thing, I think maybe in the 70s or 80s or something like that. It was associated kind of with the Grateful Dead. But then it became this company that they go around and take all these beautiful old hotels and these beautiful things in the area, old schools. There's an entire elementary school that they've converted into a hotel. It has like 5 different bars and restaurants in it. And what they do is they refurbish these places and kind of keep a lot of the building's history intact, but then kind of have this local brand that people, interact with. And it's this very Celtic flavored, hand painted kind of style that they use. And, I mean, that's something that people are doing good. I mean, I haven't seen that in a lot of areas. But in Portland, that's kind of a really special thing. Everybody knows, you just find a McMenamins and you kind of know what food you're going to get, but it's, it's this kind of, these great old buildings that everyone's different.
Do you see some kind of irony in that the places like Portland that are associated with either the liberals or the swipples have a stronger local culture, when a lot of supposedly conservative areas, everything you see is like just Walmart and track homes, and just it's basically, I mean, I view those places as just they're dead culturally and they're soulless.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is true to a certain extent. I mean, even when I think of where I grew up.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Pennsylvania, kind of near Amish country, in the middle, near the bottom, York area. And there is, I think those big box stores were able to, provide everything at once, and the downtowns kind of died in those places. But if you, even a lot of those places, I know that there's a lot coming back. And people are, going to downtowns as well. But, I agree with you to a certain extent. But, the other thing about Portland is that it does happen to be 85% white. Something like that. It's really, so it's a lot of people who are the same, and so they can get on the same page better. Whereas if you go to a place like Philadelphia or Baltimore, you have all your multiculturalism, and you have a lot of people who don't trust each other, and so there isn't really a local culture. It kind of dies. So there's a bunch of little tiny cultures.
And that's how you got into writing about the white nationalists. So you said you started rubbing elbows with white nationalists about a few years ago. You called them mighty whites.
Yeah, I think that's.
I gotta say, I like your painting you did of Charles Manson is really awesome.
Oh, thank you. I was doing those a few years ago.
It's the one with his tongue sticking out and the swastika painted on his forehead.
Yeah. Thanks. But yeah, no, I started communicating with white nationalists. At first, I have to admit, I was a little bit confused about who exactly I was talking to, because you have all these images from the media and so forth. But it seems like a lot of things have changed in the past 10 years or so. I don't think any white nationalist would have wanted to have anything to do with me a while back, and there's still a little bit of that. But
yeah, well, I saw a thread, I saw a forum on the site Stormfront where there was a poll out where like 1/3 of the people in that poll supported the death penalty for homosexuality. This was just a thread on Stormfront.
Yeah.
But it is kind of being a gay in the white nationalist movement. But I know there's a few Jewish individuals involved with AMREN, American Renaissance, I know. But
right.
It's probably, if you're gay in the white nationalist movement, you might experience some hostility, though.
Well, that hasn't been my experience. I got to say, online. If I counted all the articles that said rude things about me online, I'd probably have gay people saying more rude things about me than white nationalists. But
that's probably true. With the gay conservative, I've heard gay conservatives say that they're more welcomed by their fellow conservatives while they're despised by their fellow gays for being conservative. So that could be true. But there's different groups of the white nationalists. Some types,
absolutely.
I think some factions would be more maybe kind of vulgar against someone who's gay, and then there's a more kind of intellectual crowd, like an alt-right is a more kind of intellectual crowd. And over on sites like Stormfront, they're maybe a little bit more crude. So there's different segments. You have to take that into account.
Oh, no, absolutely. The people that I've come in contact with generally have been really polite and really cool. And to a certain extent, they're interested. They're thinkers. They ended up in white nationalism, I think, because they're thinkers and they see a lot of things that aren't true that are promoted by society. And and so they came to it, I think, from that angle and not just from, anger, but just kind of I think a lot of people came to it because they just started thinking. I see that even in what they call the manosphere, like Ferdinand Bardamu, who works in Malafide, and a few other, pickup artist sites and MRA sites, they kind of interact with the white nationalists too, which is kind of odd.
They overlap. You said Bardamu sites.
Yeah,
Ferdinand Bardamu site, exactly.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interplay there.
I think it's an excellent thing for these different movements to exchange ideas, because sometimes people divide themselves so much. Like they say, I don't want to talk to this group because I find their views offensive. So I think it's a good thing that these different groups, they don't have to necessarily merge, but interact and exchange ideas and maybe overlap.
Well, decades ago, people used to be just afraid to even be associated with white nationalists, and maybe they still should be. Maybe I'm foolish, but I think that I think a lot of people who are white nationalists have really a smart take on the world. I may not agree with everything they say at any given time, but I don't know any group that I could say that about. So I think they're. What I really like about what they're doing is kind of calling into question all these lies that have been perpetuated by kind of the liberal media and so forth. So I think that's really important to do.
So where do you disagree with them?
Well, it just depends, because who is them? As you said, there are many different factors.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
So it's hard to pin that. It's like, who am I talking to? I generally. I think that I'm white. I'm not anti-white because I'm white. I like white people. My family's white, and I would probably choose to work around white people if I could. I would, and so the idea that what really rubs me the wrong way is the idea that all these other groups can have their own identity organizations, and that white people can't.
And you point out that you say 10 out of 10 minorities agree that being a minority can really suck. Who wants to be a minority? It's not like some people get into this whole argument about who's better, who's worse, but it's all about, isn't it preferable for your group to be in the majority?
Yeah, and I think that's what the honest, intelligent argument from white nationalism is. Why would you want to be in a group where you were the odd man out all the time? It's not good. Other people don't like it. Why would we like it any better? You know?
And you say that stereotyping and prejudice is a survival tactic. It's natural, it's human, and it's not going away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we create us versus them. We create circles of trust, and people who are more like us are more likely to be in the circle of trust. You know.
What did you say? You said after living in San Francisco for a few years, you determined that most residents of the Fog City, they scribble the RV dragons over at least 40 states.
The RV dragons. Yeah. I mean, really, they if you listen to people in liberals in L.A. and San Francisco and Portland, Portland not so much because it has a little bit. There is a connection to the outside of the city, I think, more because people are really nature oriented, so they go to a lot of farms and things like that. But San Francisco and L.A.
Have you ever seen that show Portlandia?
Oh yeah. And it's the funny thing is that Portland, in many ways, the thing is what Portland culture is really a really small portion. What people recognize as Portland culture is kind of the hipster thing. Is kind of, if you really think about it, yeah, there are a lot of them. But, probably 75% of the people are just regular working people, it's a small percentage, but very visible percentage. And it's a very small city. So, yeah, you have a lot of people that are hipsters and whatever. And, yeah, they do act like Portlandia and even kind of worse. The funny thing about Portlandia is that, on the show, the actual mayor of the city plays the mayor's secretary. If that makes any sense. The city actually has a gay mayor that rides around on bikes and was in a sex scandal and the whole deal. I mean, they could have gone for that, and they aren't even doing it. So there's actually more Portlandy stuff that they haven't even skewered.
It's an even more. I think, and some people say it's a more eccentric city than San Francisco, because I think with San Francisco, the high prices have pushed a lot of those kind of eccentric people out.
Possibly. I haven't lived there in a few years. I mean, I've always felt like there was a really hardcore, I just think it's a bigger city too. San Francisco feels like a little bit of a bigger city too. So I think there's more entrenched kind of radicalism there than maybe Portland used to be, I think the kind of wackiness of Portland is newer to the culture here, I think.
Yeah. More of a recent phenomenon. And then you also talk about, so you work with Mexicans, and you talk about your experience with that.
Yeah. It's like I have nothing. I've lived with a Mexican for 13 years. I know tons of Mexican families. I've lived in California for a long time. Mexicans are generally good people, and they work really hard. But on the other hand, like I said, I'm not a Mexican, and they will hire all their friends, and they won't keep other people out so much as a matter of prejudice, but just as a matter of convenience. They need other people who speak Spanish. They need other people, they know a friend who knows a friend who knows a friend, and so they kind of create these clusters around industries, and keep other people out and whatever. So they take care of their own, and white people should do that too.
Absolutely. And then you talk about what will happen when things get tough or the shit hits the fan. And you think things would work out pretty much in the way they do in prison, is what you said, in regards to race.
Yeah, people, quick look for, quick identity things that they can latch on to. I think as things become more stressful and there's more tension, it's easy to live in peace and harmony when you have everything that you would ever want. When your biggest, problem in life is going down to the mall and trying to figure out what to buy, it's easy to embrace diversity. Yeah, but if you need to put food on your family's table and you don't know how to do that, there's going to be a lot more tension, and the in-groups and out-groups are going to be much more clearly defined. People are going to, go ahead.
You point out that there's many, many cities already where you can kind of experience what it's like for whites to be a minority. You point out Baltimore, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and you didn't. LA, of course, but you didn't mention that, and even San Diego, I think, is close.
Yeah, well, I mean, San Diego, I mean, in LA, and they have a different thing going on because those populations are very segregated. I mean, there's areas where it's, yeah, sure, all the Mexicans come into the city, to do dishwashing and other things, but a lot of them live in very Mexican areas, and the same thing with like all the blacks in LA tend to live in very black areas. You can live in I lived in Hollywood when I lived in LA, and you can live in Hollywood and near Beverly Hills and some of the nicer areas, and pretty much never have to go to those other places. So LA is kind of weird.
Would you say the same about San Francisco as well?
To a certain extent. I mean, why would you ever go to Oakland? I don't know. If you live, but even San Francisco, I mean, it's hard to walk down the street though. I mean, last time I went, I was like, wow, this is dirtier than I remember it to be. And there's the subway and there's people lying homeless on the streets and stuff like that. So it's a beautiful city, but it also has a lot of, it's hard to, that element is very intermixed in San Francisco. And, we were, you mentioned the Baltimore and Philadelphia. It's like my family's, still back in Pennsylvania, and I've thought about moving to Baltimore, Philadelphia, or Pittsburgh a lot. And, it's like I look at what those cities are, and, as going out and trying to get a working class job in those cities, it's like, well, I don't like football. I don't like basketball. And, I've never been to prison. So what do I really have in common with the people who are going to be competing with my jobs? It's.
So you'd say you'd have an easier time getting along with Mexicans and blacks?
Yeah. I think that's fair to say. I think their culture is far more distinct, and because of the way race has been promoted in America, as to a certain extent, the way that it's been charged, and they've kind of been encouraged to separate themselves off, and they kind of a lot of black guys kind of have a chip on their shoulder, which maybe they have a right to have a chip on their shoulder, but I think there's a big push.
I've noticed there's it's a stereotype that blacks are more anti-white. What do you think about working with Mexicans? Do you think a significant portion of their population is anti-white as well, or not as much?
I haven't seen that. I've always found it to not be that way. I mean, I mean, there's a little tension. There's always tension with different groups, but the thing is that Mexicans, half of them are so white anyway. I mean, there are these people, I worked with recently who, they're probably illegal. They speak almost no English.
And you speak fluent Spanish?
No, not at all. No, I mean, I'm just a regular guy, and these are just the people that you end up working with. So, and then there's that communication barrier, and that's a problem. But as far as race goes, I mean, Mexicans, a lot of them are, if you put them in my family photo, they're so white, there's some of them that look pure apocalypto Mayan. And there's some of them have been so interbred with Spanish that they're, 5'10" white. So when you talk about Mexicans, it's actually a pretty huge group. If they're not all like short little brown people, a lot of them are, varying degrees of, Spanish influence and whatever. So they're kind of even hard to pick out.
So you say that every ethnic group in America is taught to be proud of their race and ethnicity except white people.
Yeah. Well, I think we can all agree on that. Yeah. I mean, white people are definitely taught to play down their race and not think about themselves as a racial group, but they are.
And you say that if you take out a political editorial from a press release from a Hispanic, Black, Asian, or even gay publication and replace the word with white, that the average American, or especially average white American, will read it as if it's written by David Duke or George Lincoln Rockwell.
Yeah, I mean, look at the stuff that Jesse Jackson says. You know, the stuff that Al Sharpton says, if like what blacks want and what, like what blacks really need and what the black community really want. I mean, if you had somebody saying what the white community wants, people would turn and look and, expect you to, look like me, but they'd expect you to have a bald head and swastikas and all that. So, it's, that's pretty much the case.
Exactly. Well, I know some people who, on the other side, they're trying to point out that they'll point out that like the majority of politicians are white, the majority of businessmen are white, so we have nothing to really complain about. But the important thing to point out is that the white country club set doesn't give a damn about your average white person. How people point out that, white people are all the businessmen and all the politicians, but in a lot of ways, the white elite is our biggest enemy.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that, if you think about it, the same thing, and I write for these, kind of men's issues blogs and stuff too, and the same thing is true with men when you talk about men and feminism, and basically you have these men in power, in many cases white men in power, but they'll bend over backwards to do anything for women at the expense of men, to make themselves look good, to give themselves profit. And the same thing is true of race. That's why I think the men's rights, or whatever, the manosphere, kind of overlaps with white nationalists, because there's a lot of the same issues. It's the same people that are screwing us both over. There are these guys at the top who are, for their own personal gain, will basically shit on everyone else. And, they don't take other men or other white men as,
and these are the
they don't think of them as brothers.
They choose to live in exclusive white communities and send their kids to exclusive, mostly white private schools.
Yeah. I mean, they're very, it's okay. Many people have said this, it's okay for thee, but not for me, or something like that. They have a very two-faced way of looking at it. They're very protected themselves, so they can afford to be, promote diversity and so forth. And that's true, with, your kind of Swipples and, white liberals who will be in the cities and live in these very Tony neighborhoods. And
they talk about there's good diversity and bad diversity. You know what I'm getting at with the Swift type. They don't admit that, but they'll have their good diversity, which is maybe having like a bunch of different ethnic restaurants and maybe a handful of Asians, but then they won't say it, but to them they won't admit it. But bad diversity is like a black ghetto or something like that.
Well, yeah, they won't admit it because they want to talk in gilded language about it. But it's like they have this kind of, they can live in this United Colors of Benetton kind of world where all the it's almost like you have the black guy that happens to be this like nice chap from England. So I have a black friend,
Yeah.
He's so cheerio and he loves opera and classical music. Well, you're not really interacting with the black community, so to speak. They have a lot of very groomed, very, highly educated friends that are of different races, and those people maybe aren't necessarily representative. Even though, like I said, I'm not going to make supremacist arguments, but, it's just, there's a different, they're interacting with a very select group of people that appeal to their tastes.
And you say basically being a white anti-racist is about the easiest thing to be in the world. It's like being a papist in the Vatican City.
Yeah, it's so easy. Who's going to say anything bad about you? I mean, is it going to be hard for you to get a job? No. Companies have special positions for people who want to get involved in diversity. It's a growing job industry. Yeah, it's a racket. It's absolutely a racket. You go to college for some ridiculous degree where you read a lot of bell hooks, and then yeah, you get this great job that pays X amount of dollars by the government with fantastic benefits, so that you can go around and preach to other people things that you don't practice.
But then you go on to say you say that you're not a white supremacist, but you don't need to prove necessarily that your team is objectively better than the other. And I think the key thing is that all nationalism is that. Well, I got this from Ramsey Paul, but I've heard other people say it that a group has a right to exist and a right to self-determination.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, I have nothing that I can't support about that.
Yeah, you're pro. You say I'm pro-white because I'm pro-me.
Yeah. I mean, why would I? I don't understand white people who want to take an increasingly lower position in society. That seems kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, just looking out for your self-interest is the same reason you support the men's movement.
Right.
How did you get interested in the men's movement? Because I guess in general it is an overwhelmingly heterosexual straight movement. I've noticed that some of the gay groups have traditionally aligned themselves with the women's group and the feminist group. How did you get interested in these men's issues?
Well, primarily what I started working on years ago is I started kind of taking another look at where I was in life and where things, what my understanding of things were and what maybe I didn't understand as a kid. And I've always been interested in kind of gender and masculinity and femininity. And I started to look at things from a different angle, and it changed me over time. And so, the more I started to look at masculinity from a pro perspective instead of an anti perspective, the more I sympathized, obviously, with the plight of other men. And, the more I wanted to think about what masculinity was. And that's kind of my big project is trying to understand what masculinity is. And, and then when I started to understand what it was, I started to understand its place in the world right now and how threatened it is and how this beautiful thing is dying and it's being replaced by nothing better. And that's what feminism is doing, is taking this culture that men have had forever and kind of just basically inserting themselves in every situation that they could possibly be in so that men really can't have any time or space of their own and that everything revolves around women. And so when I started to see that's as I started to become more and more of a critic of feminism and also a critic. The men's rights groups too are kind of inherently feminist in a certain way because they accept certain things, whereas traditionalists will look at men and women as being kind of two polarities that don't have to be equal.
Give an example of how the men's rights movement accepts aspects of feminism.
Well, I think men's rights specifically is a feminist concept because it has to do with gender equal rights. Basically, it's the idea that men and women should have the exact same rights, and that it's kind of an equality game. Men. A lot of their positions are like, well, men, go to prison more, and how can we stop that? And men, take drugs more. How can we stop that? Men are more risky, and how can we stop that? Well, all that stuff is evolutionarily sound. Men do certain things because they're men and they're not women. And that's what feminism doesn't accept that argument. Feminism thinks that everybody should be changed by culture to basically be this kind of unitard Star Trek, kind of interchangeable person, which is very convenient to corporations and so forth, but they don't want to admit that. But
yeah, it's the same way the corporations support all the diversity stuff.
Exactly. You're just an interchangeable cog. Yeah, I mean, just that's convenient for globalism.
So what is you wrote an essay called you call it fourth wave feminism. Usually that's the last one is third wave feminism. What exactly do you mean by the fourth wave feminism?
Well, I think I kind of threw that out there kind of to be provocative to a certain extent, but the third wave feminism was, that kind of sex positive queering of feminism and so forth that happened in the 90s. And,
isn't like the slut walk, for instance,
that's
is
very
that third wave feminism.
Yeah, absolutely. Slut walk is very third wave feminism. But fourth wave feminism, I see what's happening in a lot of books that people were writing. You had this big article that came out last year in the Atlantic called "The End of Men." You have a lot of feminist authors, most of them New York City women, getting on this bandwagon to, well, men aren't doing what we want them to do. And so we're going to kind of penalize them. We have to change them, and we understand that they're different. And that's where the real break is, because feminism rejected any real psychological difference between men and women for a long time. And now there's kind of this, there's too much evidence. There's too much internet out there for them to push that anymore, because it just doesn't fly. And, okay, men are different. Well, then how they realize that men are always going to be a threat to any feminist regime. If you have men who gather together and want to assert their will, they're going to. That's why men have run, society for, however many.
So basically, fourth wave feminism is trying to change men, basically, to make it simple.
They have to, there's a variety of ways that they can do that. They want to train them more.
Okay, go ahead. What are some of the ways they'll try to do that?
Well, feminism has been on a thing for a long time, like, let's take away men's guns. Because they know that actually gives men a testosterone bounce. If you have men involved in competition and have them involved in, have them play with guns, have them do a lot of things. So they've been trying to change culture so that men don't get what they need. That's why feminists hate video games, because men are basically enacting tribal aggression fantasies over and over and over and over and over. And they're kind of getting their man on in this tiny little place that they can. And so feminists have been criticizing video game culture a lot. Because it's so violent, they hate that. And so they're trying to take away anything that makes men, and then what men end up having is they actually, their testosterone levels, are going down according to
But aren't women attracted to men with higher testosterone? So that's interesting.
Therein lies the lie. Therein lies the lie of feminism. Like they say, it's like the old song, you ask what you want, you don't want it when you get it. It's an old story. They don't really know what they want, and so they ask for what they think they want, but they kind of really want something else.
And it also kind of ties in. You reviewed the Kay Heimewitz's piece. Your article is called "Kay's Man-Child Revisited," and she basically attacks this generation of young men in their 20s who she says that they're kind of slackers and they have to man up and get married. But
Yeah, that was a huge media trend last year. Let's make I put out like a little ebook, kind of the first chapter of it summarized a lot of it. It's called No Man's Land. That's free on my site. And it's actually women. There's been this big trend in the media over the past year or two to just, call men louts and schmucks and whatever. And what this basically is the frustration of mid-30s women realizing that they want to get married and have kids now that they've been sluts for 10 years. And they're so frustrated and they're angry because men are not really receptive to that.
Exactly. One thing that the gamer types like Royce and Bardamu, they talk a lot about is this phenomenon where women will sleep around with kind of lowlifes in their 20s, but then look for kind of a nice, boring guy to take care of them when they're in their 30s. Do you think there's truth to that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, those guys, especially that it used to be Royce. Everybody calls it Royce, but it was Citizen Renegade. Now it's Heartiste. But I mean that whoever writes that is pretty much right on it. as far as what's actually going on out there. I mean, I see it with my my guy friends. They date these girls and I see what happens. I see what happens behind the scenes. I see these girls texting them naked pictures of themselves desperately, trying to get with these guys. I mean, it's totally.
The women in their 30s.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it basically, and a lot of times it's women with kids. And I have a little joke. It's like, will you be my baby's daddy? Will you be my baby's daddy? Because their baby's daddy left, and so they're like trying to find the new baby's daddy.
You probably have it a lot. You probably have it a lot easier being gay.
Yeah, I don't envy them at all. I mean, sometimes I think, I wish things had turned out differently for me, and it would be cool to have kids and do all that. And I have two sisters, and they have managed to find, they have really good husbands, and they have a really nice life. And, they do a really good job with it, fairly traditional, actually. And, I see my guy friends who are my age going through a real hard time because the women they're not the kind of women you want to marry by the time they get to their 30s. You don't necessarily want a woman who calls you up and says, hey, I really like anal. I mean, that's not really, the girl that you want to take home to mom. Sure, they like that girl.
Yeah,
but that's not the one you want to be the mother of your children.
Well, I've heard it that men have kind of the advantage. The men have kind of more of an advantage in their 30s. Women have the bigger advantage in their 20s. So some guys in their 20s are bitter. They do have a sense of bitterness, rightfully so, against the same women who kind of turn them down in favor of guys who are kind of low lives. Then, as I said, it comes around to the 30s. And now the men have the upper hand in their 30s is kind of how it goes.
Yeah, 30s and even more. The older they get, they have a little bit of a selection. Like the women are less haughty because they don't really have the looks that they maybe had. They don't have all these guys just staring at them. Because that's a drug. I mean, when you have all that attention all the time, when you're young and pretty, and you have guys who will just stumble to talk to you. I mean, that's a drug, and people,
it's a big rush to their self-esteem. Their egos are massive with that.
Yeah, but they don't realize that, he's not really attracted to you as a person. He's attracted that you're pretty and you have boobs, and that's nice. And, in 10 years, when that all doesn't look so great, what do you have that's inside that's better? And a lot of them just have attitude. And
what advice would you give to both young women and young men?
Wow, I'm at a loss because I really am. I want to give advice to my friends all the time. And what do you do? Get married? I mean, I honestly think the best thing for people, and I think many people have said this, is if you have a really good relationship and you can get into it young, I think those tend to last longer. If you take the right steps and you handle it right and you start really young, that tends to be better than saying, hey, I want to sow my wild oats. Whoever decided that we needed to do that. I mean, people didn't do it for most of history. The people who, maybe fooled around a little bit in high school, but then, they kind of stay with somebody after that. I think they probably have a better time. But then, then they have the world telling them that they have to have all these experiences that maybe people don't always have to have. So, I think it's hard for people to appreciate what they have today because they're used to this idea of the upgrade, like you can always do better. So look around the corner. So. Yeah. So your other article you also wrote this for the Spearhead. It's called Women Don't Want a Revolution. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's a long time ago. Yeah. Let me see. Yeah. March. It was back in March. Oh, okay. What'd I say? But no, I mean, that is true. I mean, women have it really good right now. I mean, they have all the cards. Why would they give them up? Why would they want to change? That's why, like, all these political movements, I mean, white nationalists, they have a big issue with it because, they want to get all these women on board. But, women will go it's, again, evolutionarily sound. Women will go where the security is and the social status is.
You know what?
And,
I know this will get me in trouble, but I think it was may have been a mistake to grant women the right to vote.
I have to agree. Well, just because even if you look at it just shifts society. Men and women are like just a little bit different. You know, they have a lot in between that they're the same, but they're just a little bit different. But it's one of those things where if you put two lines and you have them just going in slightly different directions over a long time, they go in far different directions. And it's like, unfortunately, if you have 50% of the society that, you know, was never allowed to vote and then you enter them in, I think male politicians ham-handedly cater to them. And they try and bend over backwards to get their support.
Yeah, it's the same way with politicians pandering to the minority votes. Both Democrats and Republicans really pandering to the Hispanic voters. Yeah.
And men go ahead.
Or just the same, just all these different ethnocentric groups, mainly the Republicans don't really bother with the blacks so much, but the big one is the Jewish groups and the other one's the Hispanic groups.
It's all ham-handed and it's really sleazy and they're all trying to get whatever votes. And I don't know if you've caught it at all. The series Boardwalk Empire.
No.
I wrote a piece on that for the Spearhead, just because I thought it was so great. They opened the series, and it's about, you know, gangs in Prohibition era Atlantic City, and they open it with, you know, on the verge of both. The Volstead Act, you know, with Prohibition and also the, you know, upcoming, you know, ratification of women's, you know, right to vote. And it basically had kind of a montage of all these different politicians falling all over themselves to kind of tell women that they'd give them whatever they want and say great things about women, because they knew all of a sudden there's this huge voting block that's going to open up. And they needed to be the first ones in on it. So they all focused on women and tried to give women whatever they thought women wanted. And so they kind of overplay that. And I think America is still doing that. I mean, you know, you have people who realize that women make most of the purchasing choices. So you have marketers falling all over themselves to cater to women. Because
that's a good point, because people have a tendency to stereotype feminism with Marxism, but the capitalists backed feminism for obvious reasons that you just pointed out.
Yeah. I mean, that's where the money is. I mean, I can see it happening. I've seen it happen with gyms that I've been involved with, where it's like, well, you know, women spend all the money. I mean, I have a personal trainer certification, and I never became a personal trainer really because all the market is women. Because men kind of figure it out or they don't. And women want to be, you know, the hand holding and whatever that personal trainers are. So there, you know, all these people gear all these businesses directly to women to cater to them, and so everything kind of becomes gynocentric. And it's kind of a shame, because men will just kind of retreat from that because they don't want to. They're not really wired to compete with women. They don't want to do it because it's not how they see women, and they don't want to compete with women as, other warriors or whatever. You know, they want to see women in kind of a golden light, and so that's why they lose, I think, because they don't want to. They like to see women as kind of this special magical thing, and some of them actually deserve to be seen like that, and some of them don't. But it's unfortunate. Men will just, if women arrive at get into a situation, men will, once they start feeling like it's a girl thing, they'll kind of just fade away and go do something else. And I think that's why so many of them just play video games now, because they can kind of go into their own little world, online in the internet, or at home playing video games and all that kind of stuff. They can kind of retreat to there, and that's where they can have their own space and their own time.
And exchange political ideas.
Absolutely.
I mean, the internet, most of the dissident politics or alternative politics, it's all online.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what direction do you see these different movements going in, like the men's rights movement and the pro-white movement?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, there's going to be a portion that overlaps. I think that there's a dead end of the men's right movements, which, they do some good work because there's a lot of fathers that just have a really hard time with the law. And, it's heartbreaking to see, these guys who just want to take care of their kids and they're basically, have them taken away just because they're guys. But, and that's terrible. And, anyone who can work for, kind of interim fixes like Band-Aids basically to fix that legal system, that's great. I mean, that should be supported. But, on the other hand, I think as far as getting back any kind of real masculinity and getting back to it is going to take a dismantling of globalism, because I think globalism is poison to men. It's kryptonite. Just because, like I said, they're wired for smaller tribal groups where they can have a meaningful role in it. If a farm is obviously better for, a farm is more conducive to manliness than an agribusiness.
And distributive, are you familiar? I got to wrap the show up, but sure. I just want to ask you briefly, you're familiar with distributism?
Yeah, I've read a little bit about it, yeah.
So that's kind of that's ties in with the localism and the opposition to globalism. So I want to thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me.
That's all we have for tonight, so take care, and we'll be back with you next time.